Welcome into Rounding the Bases.
Round the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rounding the Bases, presented by Community America Credit Union, invested in you. I've got a really fun, cool episode today. As all of you, I think, know, unless you're stumbling upon this for the first time, that I love storytelling. I love the journey. I love just everything that goes into where someone ends up, because it's never a direct line. And so this is a really good one today. On top of that, we're going to end up, I think, with some baseball trash talk, which I'll explain in a moment. I'm all for it. Everybody knows this is not a baseball podcast, but it always ends up there in some form or another. A quick shout out to my friends at Chief of Staff, Kansas City. Whether you're in KC, whether you're in New York, one of the coasts, or wherever it might be, if you're in the market for a job, if you are in the hunt to hire the right person, if you're just looking for a resource, check them out. I partner with them. We've got a big event coming up in November as well. chiefofstaffkc.com, making connections that matter. My connection today comes from a previous guest, Michael Shine, who has connected me with some amazing people. And my guest today is an award-winning curator of inspiration. Her name is Miriam Schulman, a best-selling business author and art-trepreneur who traded a career on Wall Street for one in watercolor. But her masterpiece is something called the Inspiration Place, a community for creative professionals where skill and profitability intersect. By leveraging lessons from the world's biggest exchange, this award-winning artist does more than add beauty to the world. She empowers others to invest in themselves and build the thriving business they were meant for. I will not hold it against her, just as I say to some of my family members that she is a New York Yankees fan. I am happy to be joined right now. Let's just throw it right out there. Right out of the gate.
How'd you guess that? Is it because I have one of these in every color? And for those who can't see me, I have the very chic tan Yankee cap. I have a black one. I have a white one. I have one in brat green now to stay up to date.
I'm telling you what, we're recording this on October 8th, which is in between games 2 and 3 of the series. And I full well understand that when this airs on October 15th, one of these two teams will be in the American League Championship Series against
Yankees.
Cleveland or Detroit. If you're lucky. No, and one won't. So I know. I sort of wanted to release this today so we can get all this tension out there. But I do think it's probably fun after the fact when people are listening and being like, boy, they have no idea what just happened. No, they have no idea about that big home run. They have no idea about that Bill Buckner error. They have no idea what's going on. So it is kind of a fun time of year. And I just love this matchup of two old rivals from the 70s that in the last 10 years, only one of these two teams has won a world championship, and it's the small market Kansas City Royals. But maybe this will be your year.
Yeah, well, my doorman asked me if my husband knew I was doing this interview today. And I said, well, I'm just going to have my Elaine moment and wear my Yankee cap on Joel Goldberg's podcast. You know the episode I'm talking about, right?
Course, of course. I'm just wondering, if anybody wants to be the assistant to the traveling secretary, and we could bring Costanza into the mix as well. But fun stuff, fun times. We haven't even talked about your career yet. We're 4 minutes in. We'll get there in a moment. Yeah. But I will say this, and it is a nice segue to your career as well. There's nothing like the energy. I've been telling people this leading into the first 2 games of this series. There's nothing like the energy of New York, and there's nothing like the energy up in the Bronx at Yankee Stadium. And the Mets have their own energy. That's a totally different thing. I'm not sure if I can explain that as well as the Bronx, because I've been in the American League for the last 17 years. There's just something about going up to the Bronx. Positive energy, negative energy, whatever it is. There's something truly unique about New York. And I'm going there just because it's been certainly, I think, a part of your career, right? I mean, a major career shift from Wall Street to the world of art in New York.
Yeah, I mean, New York, I'm just at the epicenter of everything. And there used to be this old poster. You're probably old enough to remember. It was New Yorker's view of the world. And so it has a map of the United States. I think it's from like a New Yorker cartoon. And the map of the United States, you see New York on one side, and then there's basically nothing in between. And then you see California, and then maybe it like refers to, okay, yeah, and there's London over here. Like New Yorker, we think we're the epicenter of the world. So and that's kind of what I'm like.
Yeah, no, it's all right. And, you're just reinforcing the inferiority complex that all of us in the Midwest and flyover states have. But we, by the way, love those of us that are in Kansas City, love it here. It's thriving, and it's not just the sports and the World Cup that's coming, and a great art scene, by the way, thriving art scene and an incredible symphony hall and on and on. This is a hidden gem. People would tell you that wherever you're at and come to Kansas City. And so suddenly this is brought to you by the Chamber of Commerce of Kansas City.
Right.
We've got our barbecue. Anyway, I was thinking about all that and the silliness, not silliness, but the fun really of Royals and Yankees. And there's a whole younger generation that has only heard about how hated that was, George Brett and Reggie Jackson and all of that stuff. But, I guess they say, what is it? If you can make it there, you make it anywhere. And you had, I think from everything that I've heard and read, you had your career on Wall Street. You were on a certain path.
I was. So there's a very famous book. Michael Lewis has put out a lot of books, but his most famous one is probably Liar's Poker. And in it was basically about the thugs on Wall Street. It's like the mafia. And that's who I worked for. Those guys when I was on Wall Street. So like, not only was I working for Wall Street, but I was working for like the famous guys who, the stereotypes of what people talk about. People,
the Wolf of Wall Street type of stuff.
Yeah, I didn't see drugs with my the people I worked with, but there's this very famous story where, and people who like bet on sports might appreciate this. There's a very famous story in Liar's Poker where the trader bets $1 million for a hand of poker. And when I first started working for this firm, I asked people, "Hey, is that true?" And my friend John told me, "Oh no, it wasn't for $1 million. It was for a finger." Like they vet that if you lose, you have to cut off a finger, like with one of those cigar cutters. So it's like, oh, okay.
That's the real deal.
It's the real deal. So that was the world that I worked in. And I was at the World Trade Center when it was bombed in 93. And I was shocked that people didn't leave. I was like, do you see what's going on out there? Why are we still working? So then when 9/11 happened, and I wasn't working at that moment in corporate, I was just thinking, oh, thank God I'm not working there anymore. I would be dead. I'd be one of the dead people. So not to make light of it, but when 9/11 happened, that was my aha moment that life is too short. And that was a sign from the universe not to go back to Wall Street. I was taking maternity leave at that time, not to go back to Wall Street, but to do something else with my life. And at first, I didn't know I would become an artist. I didn't believe I could make a living that way. But I knew I wasn't going to go back to Wall Street.
So you had the art in you, obviously, right? You just had never thought about it.
It's not like it was like, oh, and now I'll become an artist.
Yeah.
I just always was told you can't make a living that way.
Right.
So
there's a lot there that I want to get to, because I think that part of what you're doing, I mean, I know it's for artists, but I mean, I think that there's a bigger picture, right? There's thinking big of, if you've always been told you can only do it this way or you can't do it that way, that maybe there is a way, right? And then maybe that's the spirit of an artist's creativity. I'm not sure.
Well, there's so much that, as you know, Joel, for doing this podcast, there's so much in sports and in entrepreneurship that's about mindset. And everything starts with this, what you believe to be true. So that's why I start off Artpreneur with choose to believe. That's the first chapter of the book, which, by the way, the listeners can get that for free. It's schulmanart.com/believe. So you can read that chapter and find out what I'm talking about there. But the point is that if you have a thought and you think it enough, that becomes your belief. That's all a belief really is, a thought that you've practiced. So you got to be very careful about these thoughts that you're telling yourselves, because you make them true. And that's not by some woo magical way. But if I believe, if I were to give you, Joel, like 10 envelopes and say there's $1 million in all of them, as long as you believe me, you will open every single last one of those. You're not going to open 3 and say, oh, well, that didn't work. But if you don't believe it's true, I don't think this is going to work, So then when you believe, you get creative, you pivot. Okay, that didn't work. All right, I have to do a knuckleball now. Whatever it is, like you keep trying different ways to get what it is that you want. As long as you believe that there is going to be a way, you will keep trying every single last way.
It's interesting because a lot of people give up, right? So I guess in that case, it's a lack of belief or a lack of conviction or both.
You have to have relentless commitment to succeed in entrepreneurship as an artist. Anything that is really worth having, you have to go all the way, and not just somewhat of the way. Just not like, oh, I sort of tried that and it didn't work for me.
So let's go back to the pre-finger chopping era of your
it's amazing, isn't it?
Of your life. I'm glad that never happened. I think that never happened.
So I put that in my book. There's a whole chapter about Wall Street in there, and my publishers were just shaking their head. Nobody wants to read this. It's my legit everyone's favorite chapter in the whole book.
So
it's like, yeah.
Hello, publishers. Sometimes the instinct of the author is indeed correct. What like growing up, what did you want to do, and then as you got to Wall Street, did you think you were doing it?
Okay, so I did not grow up in privilege. My father passed away when I was 5 years old. I went to college on financial aid. And some people say you're not going to make a living that way. Well, I really didn't have a choice. It's not like somebody was going to fund me. So I was like, all right, where the exit doors are marked with college education right now. I'm going for that. And I said, well, if the whole point is to make money, where can I make as much as possible? So that's why I went to Wall Street. It's like, I was being told this is the whole point. I was like, fine, show me where the money is. So that's what led me to Wall Street. And I am good at math. So it's not like, this was something that was in my wheelhouse to do.
Well, I mean, I think that I think your story is very similar to a lot of people's who will take the money versus maybe where the passion or the true interests are, because, hey, we got to pay the bills. We got to survive. We got to do what it takes. And then you got a bunch of us, but people that are telling you, find your purpose, make an impact in this world. And it's like, well, I'm just trying to pay the bills too. And it sounds to me as though, I don't know that was the case, but your aha moment certainly shifted you into doing what you were meant to do.
Okay. So there's 2 aha moments. One, I wouldn't call it an aha moment, but just like, that's what you're not meant to do. But the second one, which is really important, which is what I want the business people who are listening to hear, is, so at first I didn't become an artist. I took a job working for a gym as a Pilates instructor, and they wanted me to sell personal training packages. And they gave us a lot of skills. They trained us how to sell, because that's really what a lot of these gym models, they make a lot of money off of those personal training packages. In fact, I was shocked. I found out the other day from Equinox that the personal trainers maybe make $30 off of $120 personal training session that, somebody might pay for. Anyway, so that's when I had my aha moment, because they were teaching me things and I was like, whoa, I can use exactly what they're teaching me now to sell my art. And so ever since that moment, it's like, I'm just going to go all in and use these things that they taught me to sell my art. And I've become a student of marketing ever since. And this is the gift that I give my clients, my readers, and my listeners, is because I'm saying, hey, this will work for you, even for art. And if you're not an artist, it'll work for you. So it's like, these are time-tested strategies that work for anybody.
I guess the message being an artist can relate to this better than someone like me that has no artistic ability, at least in terms of Yeah, I don't have any artistic ability. But
People say that, and I want to just push back on it. I get what you mean, because you're probably thinking of A, with artists with an A, capital A,
but
but
I'm
everybody
creative.
has creativity,
Sure.
and you need that creativity in sports,
Yeah.
in business. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
like what everybody has.
I'm mostly just mocking the fact that if I were to draw or paint something right now, it would potentially be in the running to win the first grade contest. But yes, I believe that most of us, in some form or another, certainly in my profession, there is creativity. There's creativity in presentation. There's creativity in writing. There's creativity in delivery. In on and on and on. Right. So yes, I mean, I totally understand that. But I think my greater point is that there is a community of artists, whether it be within a certain area or worldwide, right? Artists may not be thinking along the way that you're thinking, or have never been given that opportunity before. That was, if I'm understanding everything correctly, and fill in the blank. It doesn't have to be artist, right? But
That's right.
But
so the book that I wrote, it's not just for painters, it's for
right.
any person who's a creative. But a lot of what I do is helping people not just get over the belief, but it's also give them the skills that they need. So I'm working with one client who last year made $13,000, and that was through galleries. And this year she's on track for 6 figures, and we're only in October. Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. The last time I checked in with her, she was at 89,000 for 2024.
Because Miriam, I mean, some people are great at the creative piece of it, right? Some people know how to paint. Some people know how to draw. Some people know how to write. Some people know how to fill in the blank of whatever your skill is, but not everybody knows how to sell it, or vice versa. Some people know how to sell, but they don't have something to sell, whatever it is. And so it seems to me as though you have unlocked this ability, not just for artists, but for people to be able to go out there and leverage what their skills are, which could be scary, right?
Yeah. And she's an introvert. So it's not like, people ask me that, do you need a certain personality? It's not about hustle culture. It's not about bro culture. It's not about being pushy.
On your website, which is schulmanart.com, and we'll have that in the show notes, as well as links to the book. It says, and we covered this, back in the 90s, you'd find me at the World Trade Center in my Ann Taylor suits. But after 9/11 happened, I took it as a sign from the universe and made art my full-time career. That was over 20 years ago, with many ups and downs along the way. Fast forward to today, whether you're an absolute newbie or a seasoned professional, you too can learn how to grow a thriving art business so that you can have the time and freedom to create art and do what you love. Or as we just said, it could be other professions as well. What's the satisfaction level for this? And this isn't new. You've been doing this for a while. What's the satisfaction? How do you feel about your purpose? I mean, how fulfilling is this work?
I love it. So first of all, Joel, it was I was I had a sustainable career as an artist, selling my portraits for 20 years, and then the last 5 years I've been helping artists do the same thing. So there's 2 things. One is very satisfying to me. It's always satisfying to be able to prove people wrong. So the people who said I couldn't do it, it's like, no, I did it. But also now the satisfaction of helping somebody make 6 figures from their artwork and give them that gift. I'm changing lives. So it's incredibly satisfying.
And that's not something you could have ever thought about, or maybe it's something you did dream of. I don't know. You couldn't have thought of that when you're on Wall Street, the ability to change lives.
No, I did. No, right. And it's I think you talked about this at the beginning of the show, how like the circuitous route. When I was in college, I never could have said someday I'm going to be an artist business coach, who has a podcast.
Like that didn't exist.
No, it didn't exist. And I had to go through all these different things to get to where I am now.
There's a quote, I won't get it exactly right, but so I'm wrapping up my second book, and it'll be out in January. But in the intro that I wrote to the book, I'm quoting one of my podcast guests who basically said that there are jobs that don't exist right now for kids in middle school, that when they get out of college, we don't even know what they are. And I think about that a lot. When she told me that, I'd heard versions of that before, but it just resonated with me because who really has taken anything but a circuitous path? I mean, that's life, right? Nothing is point A to point B, and eventually, or hopefully, we learn that. For me, when I was 7, 8 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a television broadcaster. I knew that I either wanted to be the guy on the news, doing the sports at the end of the newscast, which still exists, but it's not the same, by the way, anymore from when we were growing up, or the play-by-play guy. And I went the news route and then ended up as the pre and post game show host of baseball games and sometimes hockey too in the past, and in-game reporter and podcast host. None of those things existed. There were like, I don't know, a half a dozen in sideline reporters that did the big national game of the week or Monday Night Football, like Lynn Swan or something. But teams didn't have that type of stuff. There was no such thing as a pregame or a postgame show, maybe something national. And we certainly had no idea what podcasts were. So I think that it's a reminder to everyone out there that not only should you pivot, you're going to pivot at some point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the world that we live in. And I mean, I think we're probably similar in age, and it's like there's stuff that our kids are doing right now that, I'm starting to feel a little bit older because I got to ask them what it is. I mean, that's
I use that card all the time, by the way. If I'm on the phone with some customer service, I tell them I'm really old. Like I like make myself older. It's like, could you please help me? I'm from Generation X. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, our parents left us home alone, and we were latchkey kids. Yes, so but hey, that's our generation. All right, I want to talk about there are a bunch of things. I mean, certainly the book and the business, but I want to talk more about the podcast and what that has meant to you. The inspiration place. Tell me about the podcast.
Now, I had written down what my biggest home run hit is. I think it's the podcast. It might be the book, but the podcast got me the book deal. So this has been my home run, and it was just something that I had started writing articles for a small niche magazine. So about 6 years ago, and I couldn't believe just the access you got when you are the press. It's like, oh, you mean I can just like interview people and ask them questions and they'll tell me? Like, this is amazing. So this was for a magazine. So I decided, well, next level is podcast. So I really started the podcast a little bit more for me than I did for, everyone else. But I thought like this was the best way to get intel.
It's interesting because I'm not going to say I tell everybody to start a podcast, but I think that like if the goal is to go out there and have the number one rated whatever podcast that makes millions of dollars, good luck, and hey, go for it. But it doesn't really have to be anything per se. It could be a podcast that highlights some of your clients and prospects. It can be a great storytelling mechanism, which it is for me, among other things. I think that's the beauty of this podcasting world is if you could at least figure out, and there are a million tutorials, it's easy, the how-to part of it. What equipment do I need? How do I start it? Where do I upload it? What, cover art, all these type of things. If you could figure that out, which is just a checklist of things to do, and maybe have at least a decent voice or not sound like you're, in a wind tunnel somewhere or whatever. It doesn't even have to be a great studio, out of the house, whatever it is, that there's so many things that can be done with it. I'm wondering now, not after the fact, but during the fact, what that podcast you mentioned, it led to book deal and all of that, what that has done for the brand.
Oh, it's amazing. I consider my podcast the gateway drug. Like if there's somebody who's never heard of me, like if somebody meets me on social media, the first thing my team has been instructed to do, we basically welcome everybody who follows us. And what we say is, hey, welcome. I help artists. Did you find me because of the podcast or the book? And the reason I ask that, Joel, is because I'm dropping in a credibility marker. I have a podcast and I have a book, because people follow you don't know how they followed you. And if they don't know about the podcast, the first thing we tell them is like, oh, have a listen to the podcast. I don't try to sell them anything, because I know eventually if they're for me, if I'm for them, they will make up the decision themselves by listening to the podcast very quickly.
And it's not all it's not all about art either, right? I
No,
mean,
it's
I
no,
think
my
that
podcast is definitely not all about
it's
art.
very much, like mine is not all about baseball. There certainly are
Exactly.
baseball references, and sometimes there are baseball guests. I mean, I'm looking at the quote unquote playlist. That's at least what I'm calling it of the
Yeah.
podcast, and some of the topics are some of it's about art, but I mean some of it beating back imposter syndrome. Who doesn't have that? AI versus creativity. Who's not talking about that? The real danger of TikTok. These are really important topics that, as far as I look at it, what is the real danger of TikTok, by the way?
We want to go there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there's a couple of different things. First of all, it's influencing our elections.
Yeah.
So that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of people who are using it for business, this is what I tell people. This is how I have clients who are now making six figures, is that we waste so much time creating content for the Zuckerverse that really doesn't lead to profits. If you're putting a lot of time into TikTok, you can have someone follow you and then never see your content ever again. So there are influencers in air quote influencers on TikTok who people really have never heard of, because it's very easy to rack up numbers of followers, but it's based on an algorithm.
Yep.
So if you're scrolling, and this is true of any social media, if you're scrolling any of them, you're not stopping to buy their stuff. You're being pushed to stay on that platform as long as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've trained my Instagram to only show me cute cats and Simone Biles doing flip-flops on the balance beam. So that's what they show me, you know, like.
Yeah, I do try to linger on. I just go through stretches of TikTok. I'm there for a couple of weeks, then I'm not there. But I'll try to linger on all the things that I think are interesting, so it'll populate that way. And if
you train it.
If I stumble upon something that I had no interest in, I try to move by it as fast as possible. I've made the mistake once of clicking on a link to buy 5 polo shirts for blah blah blah, and now everyone that's selling polo shirts ends up in my feed. I'll get rid of them eventually.
Right.
What a world that we live in, though. And so, I mean, to me, it's, I guess I did just go down this rabbit hole, but that's the fun thing of these podcasts too, is that they take you to interesting places. We live in this algorithm world.
Yeah. I went to a talk last night, and they were talking about how the reason why people are so used to having a very curated experience on their phone, that when the rest of the world doesn't match up to that, that's what creates so much anxiety for us.
Yeah, not to mention election and people hating each other, and right. I mean, we're all living in our own we're all living in our individual echo chambers,
in our bubble, which I prefer. Like after every debate, I was like, what do my people say about this? That's all I want to hear.
I don't want to hear anybody.
I don't want to hear anything else.
Right. And we didn't have those options growing up. So it's Pandora's box at its best and oftentimes at its worst. I'll come back to the podcast in my 4 final questions and ask you something like, favorite episode, or I don't know, it'll be something like that. But tell me about the book as well.
All right. So the book was something I thought of doing during the pandemic. We're all stuck at home. I was like, okay, this is a good time to write the book. And I wanted to create legacy. This is something. So you say we're about the same age. I think I'm probably older. I'm 55. So when you hit your 50s, you start to think more about legacy. Do you find that true? Are you 50?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Come on. With all this white hair, 52.
Okay. All right. So do you understand what I'm talking about, Joel? How when you hit your 50s, you start to think more about legacy.
You're not thinking about that in your 20s and 30s.
No. So, I mean, the podcast has some legacy, but some people stop paying for my Libsyn account. It's gone. So I wanted to put something out in the world. I had stories I wanted to tell, like the finger story we mentioned earlier. That's why I said to my publishers, no, the Wall Street chapter stays. It's like, I want to tell this story.
Yeah.
So, there's things you want to put out in the world, and writing the book was how I wanted to do it. And I'm writing a second book now, which you said you're writing a second book as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's close. It's, should have been done a year ago, but baseball got in the way, I guess. So
what's your new book about?
It's similar to the first. So the first one, you'll get a copy of it. I'll send you one. The first one was small ball, big results. So I've got the small ball question coming up. What are the little things that make people and organizations successful? Right, baseball terms, the bunting, the sacrifices. What doesn't show up? Second one is small ball, big dreams. So it's just a continuation of storytelling, people in and out of baseball, and very much that gets back to that circuitous path. No one in that book. No chapter focusing on anyone in that book has had a straight line of a path. One I'll give you a little preview right now, or I guess, I don't know if I'm talking to you, I'm talking to the audience. It's everybody, of course.
Yeah,
One chapter.
We know they're listening, though.
We hope so.
Right.
I'm not just saying this for you. One chapter is on longtime Yankees announcer, play-by-play voice, Susan Waldman. And here's a woman that was on Broadway. I don't know if it's as much of a 180 degree turn as your career, but this is a woman that was on Broadway that didn't want to be typecast as the mom in every show as she was getting older. And she had sung national anthems, at baseball games and sporting events, and had always been into sports. And so she is the first sports radio update person or talk show on WFAN in New York, first woman. And then she is covering the Yankees and Mets, ostracized by everyone because she was the only woman, was completely not talked to for a whole year, and on and on and on. And now she is a legendary voice for the Yankees. And any of the women that are getting into the business right now, that are finally getting into the booth the way she is, not just on the sideline, are following in her footsteps. And so it's a lot of that in the book. And, it's as I said to you before, I'm a storyteller. I love this stuff.
And I'm really glad you included
Are you
that
interviewing
story.
me now? What's going on?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. I'm glad you included that story. That was one thing else I wanted to make sure with my book, that it was inclusive, because I pick up so many business books and art books where there's not a single woman in the entire book. And it's like, I wanted to recenter, not just, recenter everybody a little bit more, because there's so many interesting stories that just don't get told.
Let's get to the baseball theme questions, and you answered one of them, but we'll just circle back on it. The home run. It's the podcast. It's the book. It's all of it, right?
Book, the book is going into its third printing, so it's definitely outperformed what the publisher's expectations. I'm proud about that. Couple of swing and misses. Is that the next question, or do you want our small ball?
Swings and misses, and what did you learn from them?
Okay, so I'm always trying things, and not everything I try works out. I think, Joel, one of the biggest differences between people who are successful and those who aren't are successful people are willing to try things that unsuccessful people just aren't willing to try. So when I was promoting my book, I thought, oh, my podcast does so well, I will do an Alexa flash briefing on the book. Do you know what Alexa is? Flash briefing, not Alexa, but Alexa flash briefings are.
I don't know.
No, well, apparently my listeners don't either. So that was definitely a fail. And my podcast editor who was helping me put it out. She says, no, I love it. I was like, yeah, that's why you're one of the 5 listeners. So, and I have a friend who may be a good fit for this podcast. She has the top Alexa flash briefing. She gets 1,000 listeners per episode. It's like a daily show. So that was definitely a swing and a miss. So I'm willing to try things, and not everything I try works out. Sometimes oops,
so
that didn't work.
That's one of the things where, like, when I don't have an Alexa in this room, thankfully, or it would go off right now.
Oh, right.
That's one of those things where, I ask it for the weather, and then it says, would you like a briefing in the morning, or would you like to set an alert for blah, blah, blah? I'm like, no, that's not what I was looking for.
Yeah. So my friend Jen, she does mostly on AI, like AI and systems, things like that every day, like what's new in the world of AI. Other people do stuff about spirituality. So it's a daily thing. And the reason I thought it would work is because Alexa's owned by Amazon, and I thought that it would be a great way to promote the book, but
okay,
nobody listened. Nobody listened to it. So yeah, but I'm willing to try, and some things that I try work out really well. So, but I'm willing to try things.
You got to try them. And I think that's aren't most artists willing to try things, or do I have that wrong? I mean, maybe I'm making too much of the creative spirit. I don't know.
I think good artists are.
Okay.
Yeah. So creativity, there's a famous Matisse quote, creativity takes courage.
I like that. The final baseball theme question, small ball. What are the little things that add up to big results for you?
Okay, so it's so boring, but this is what it is. It's consistency.
Mm-hmm.
So the podcast I started in 2018, and it's come out every single Tuesday since I started it without a break. Sometimes I will do an encore episode, but it comes out every single week. So that's just one example. But like, it sounds like such boring advice for people like think, what's the secret behind the podcast? It's like, you just keep doing it.
Yep.
You will get better. When I started out, there was only 150 listeners, and now we have thousands. So, I mean, this is part of what consistency gets you.
That was one of the first pieces of advice that I had from a good friend of mine, who is a creative editor, video production business, longtime friend up from junior high on. I mean, Midwest, after I moved to the Midwest, and worked for Oprah, and he's done podcasts. And when I started mine in 2017, he said, I don't care if it's once a month, if it's every other month, if it's twice a week, if it's 5 times a week, whatever it is, do that. And now it took me a while to figure out and to settle on once a week. There were renditions, and initially it was every other week. And then during the pandemic, it was 3 a week plus 2 more on Facebook, which was insane to be doing 5 a week, but I had nothing else going on. Baseball was out. But the point is to yours, and I love that you mentioned it, because, and I don't know, I mean, it certainly helps with the algorithms. It helps with people's mental like their actual algorithms of knowing, wait, Miriam's podcast is coming out on Tuesday. Joel's podcast, by the way, is also coming out on Tuesday. So never miss. I mean, I never miss an episode.
Yeah. I mean, showing up is 80% of success. So
I have 4 final questions, but before I do that, I just wanted to ask you, because a topic that I'm covering, I don't usually announce it like this, but the topic I'm covering in my next newsletter is validation. We were kind of thinking about, like a baseball team, whether it's the Kansas City Royals or whatever, where you have doubters along the way and you have this goal and then you achieve it. And, the validation to that, whether it's a chip on the shoulder, proving people wrong or whatever it is. And so for you talked a little bit about that earlier. I'm curious how you've processed that over time. Like, this is who you are. This is what you do now. But what were the doubts like early on, whether they be externally or internally in your head? What were those doubts like, and when did they start to go away? What did that feel like?
Okay, so this is a great question, and I love it. For whatever reason, with art, I didn't have as much of the doubts. But when I went to write the book, I had no problem believing that somebody would buy the book, like that I would get an agent and the publisher would buy into the idea. And it is a HarperCollins book, by the way. But once I signed that contract, all kinds of imposter syndrome creeped in. I was like, oh my God, they made a huge mistake. I should give my bonus back, or whatever, the signing thing back. And even when I was done with it, oh, nobody likes this. So it was huge. There was a lot of tears, and a lot of maybe unnecessary drama over writing the book, that first book that I had to get over.
What about once the business became successful? Not just the book and the podcast, the coaching, the classes, all of it. I mean, it's a whole thing now, right? I mean,
it is a whole
thing. You're not just being described as an artist or as a podcast host. It's a whole thing. So,
yeah, I have $1 million business, but it hasn't always been that way.
Yeah.
And I remember there were times I used to say to myself, oh, I'm just planting the seeds and next year it's going to really grow. And then next year would come and be like incrementally better or the same. I was like, oh, when's it going to be my turn? So now I don't feel that way as much. I feel like I've got this. I know what I'm doing, but it did take me a long time to get here. I mean, you're interviewing someone who's 55 years old. It was a lot different 10 years ago.
Were there moments that you questioned it or wanted to give up?
Oh yeah, I have. And sometimes I still have the secret fantasy that it would be a lot easier to work at Bloomingdale's. Like if I have a bad quarter, it's like, oh, I could have gotten a discount, on the clothes and
I think
made
you're
more
in the right
money.
spot. You're in the right spot. All right, let's do this. 4 final questions as we round the bases. Who's that one interview on the podcast that just blew you away, or either you couldn't believe you had them, or you were just amazed at their answers? This is like asking who your favorite kid is, I think, to some people. But
I know, but we all have a secret favorite.
Yeah.
I won't tell them. Okay, so I think just the one that pops into my head. I'm not going to go and say it's my favorite, but I did an interview with Jerry Saltz, who is the art critic for New York Magazine, and that is one of my favorite episodes. So that one was really amazing. But the one that dropped today that I did with Perry Marshall, he's an expert on business and AI, and he was talking on the podcast how I was like, well, you need God to be a good marketer or something like that. I was like, I got you to say that. This is great. So that's another one.
All right, that's good stuff. Second question, as we round the bases, how much are you still painting? How much are you still working in the world of art?
Not so much with painting now. So now, once I got over that, I'm not an author. Why am I writing a book? Now I'm writing a second book. So my creativity actually is going into my writing instead of my visual art. So I had to become a new person in order to write the book. And now I'm this new person who doesn't paint anymore. So maybe someday I'll go back to it, but yeah, I don't paint that much, and I don't keep that a secret from anybody.
Is there anything with that? I've always heard, not even, well, I guess anybody that's painting in some form or another is an artist, but I've heard a lot of people, whether it be sitting down to play the piano or painting something, that it's a form of relaxation or meditation or escape. That I'm guessing is not the case, or maybe it was at some point, or there's no time. I don't know.
A lot of it also had to do with the pandemic, because I started the book in the pandemic and things shifted a lot for me. So prior to 2020, I made my living as a portrait artist. And so I was painting in a very realistic way. Once the pandemic hit, I didn't want to paint realistic things anymore. So I have done some painting, but it's not in the style that I was known for. And I've been keeping that art private. So I've been painting in a more abstract way that represents the chaos that I'm feeling. So there's part of that as well. And I have been asked to commission some work. Somebody reached out to me. They wanted me to paint their puppy. I don't know how they found me. And I just decided I wasn't going to pick up my paintbrush for less than $1,000. And they said yes. So it's like, okay, next time it's 2,000, so
that's how you learn.
Right. Yeah.
People love their dogs, by the way.
Oh, yes. Oh my God.
I don't know if I do 1,000 for a portrait, and then I've got a second dog, and so it would have to be both dogs.
That's right. And then the next dog.
Right.
It's pet portraits are very lucrative.
I have no doubt. All right, third question as we round the bases. I think I know the answer to this, but it's always a fun question anyway. Do you in any way, 1 ounce of you miss Wall Street or that world?
Yeah. Yes.
You do.
I
thought this was going to be one of those, like.
Oh, you thought it was going to be no?
Yeah.
Yeah. People look at me and they can't see it, but it was exciting. I liked being on, and I was on the razor edge of a lot of some of the biggest things happening at the time. I liked being on the front lines of those disasters. Yeah. It was an exciting roller coaster ride. So yeah, a little bit of me does miss that.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's interesting. The excitement, the thrill, the pace of it, I would imagine, right? There's an energy to it.
Yeah. Being a woman in that world, don't miss that. But
which I'm guessing has gotten better, but is nowhere near.
No, it really hasn't.
Not at all.
No, I don't.
Just a little bit. I don't know.
People don't talk about it as much. It's like it's more gone. Yeah.
Brush that under the
underground.
Table. Yeah. Okay, final question, the walk-off. We've touched on elements of this throughout the podcast, but I think anyone that is listening that wants to do something, try something, whether you're completely satisfied with your life or whether you're saying, you know what, I don't like what I'm doing at all. It's hard, right? It's hard to make a change. It's hard to pull that plug and do something else. You did it. You had the motivation on many fronts. Could have never envisioned what it was going to turn into. And all these years later at 55, it feels like to me that in baseball terms, you're just hitting your prime, right? You're just hitting the sweet spot, so to speak, with the way we would talk in baseball. And so it can happen. It doesn't happen overnight. By the way, that's one of the problems of social media and TikTok and influencers is everybody wants to hit and yes, somebody does win the lottery, but for the most part, you don't. So you got to do that consistent work every single day. What's your advice, your motivation, a little bit of hope for anyone that might want to be starting something? And again, we're not talking necessarily about art here.
Yeah. Okay. So we've touched upon this several times throughout the podcast, and that is that humans want to stay safe. Our brains have evolved for survival, not goal achievement. So anytime you're going to do something that pushes you and a little outside your comfort zone, your brain's going to come up with all kinds of reasons why it's a terrible idea. And the smarter you are and the more creative you are, the better you'll be at coming up with those reasons why not to do it. So that's what makes it so hard for people to set big goals and follow through with it, because you got to get out of your own way.
It's great advice for everyone. I want to remind everybody, check out the podcast, the book, check out Miriam's work, schulmanart.com. And what was the free chapter again?
Oh, go to schulmanart.com/believe, or if you have the link to my Instagram on social media, which is also Schulman Art spelled with a C, DM me the word believe and I'll send it your way. That's for the free chapter.
We'll get that in the show notes as well. SCHULMAN. I like to say it, but people can look at it right in the notes and do that. Check out the podcast, all of it. Really, really cool stuff. I'm so glad that we had a chance to do this. I'd say good luck to the Yankees, but by the time this runs, it's already over. I'm not wishing you good luck either way.
No,
but
you're not supposed to.
No, I know.
We have a good friend who's Ed Coleman, who does what you do for the Mets.
Sure.
His wife sold our house. Different religion.
It is fun though, right? What is, by the way, the difference between Yankees and Mets fans? Well, I'm going to end on that.
There's a huge difference.
I know.
I really, it's kind of like the Jets and the Giants too. So it's Starbelly Sneetches.
It's not really geography. Sometimes it is. It's not necessarily though, right?
It's not necessarily, but Yankees are more old in New York. Mets, it's more like Mets and Jets are usually more Long Island, but not necessarily. It's more blue collar sometimes. I'm going to say something really that I will regret. So I'm going to stop talking now. All right,
that's fine. I was going to say we could cut it out, but it could have been really good. So we'll end it on that. I have no idea why I just decided to explain Yankees versus Mets. Other than all I can say is that I don't get to Mets as much. I get to Yankee Stadium, and I have the same hatred's the wrong word. I'm in the business, so I don't really care that much. Like it's just another day always for me. But I'm probably like the rest of the country that views them as the evil empire, yet I love every chance I get to get up in the Bronx. It's so much fun. There's just an energy to it. I'm down on the field doing our pregame shows, and inevitably some cast from some Broadway show is walking by to sing the national anthem or something like that. There's just always something going on, and it's not just one thing, right? The kid from the Sandlot is walking by one day. I mean, it's just like you never know who you're going to see, but you're always going to see somebody. I don't know that really sums up the differences.
I don't know. I think a sport team spirit is a good thing. So I don't think it's a bad thing to have team spirit and rivalries. I mean, I think that's what we should be putting that energy into.
Yeah, and I'll wrap it up with this.
Instead of hating people because of other, way they look or their religion or something else.
Amen on that. 100%. If that's the best part that comes of me bringing up Yankees Mets, I totally agree with it. There's too much hate in this world, and if that hate can just boil down to two teams not liking each other, all you have to do is look at the crowds at Yankee Stadium and at Shea Stadium at the time, 9/11, and the way it brought people together. And we were at Yankee Stadium this year on 9/11. So the ceremonies and just that there was just a feeling again there. And so that's something that certainly I'll never forget. Miriam, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate you spending time talking about your world, the world of art, the world of entrepreneurship, the world of taking chances, and so much more. I think there's a lot that people are going to learn from this. Thanks so much for spending time on Rounding the Bases.
Well, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg.